Realm presents The Shadow Files of Morgan Knox. Episode 3.
Bellevue Hospital looms over her like a damn brick castle. Knox glances up at it with something like resentment as she climbs the short flight of steps and heads for the wide entrance. The resentment is followed almost immediately by a twinge of annoyance. The truth is that this place has always made her uneasy. The truth is that any place that serves the sick or the wounded or the insane makes her uneasy. It's not that she sees anything but what's really there. Not exactly. But it's as if she can look through the facade anyway. The clean white and red and the carefully trimmed trees on either side of the steps. And she can perceive what lies beneath the surface. See-through skin, like the thin curtains that separate the medical bays. And beyond that, all the blood and the guts and the screaming. All the same. Every single one, all over the world. At least, she isn't on her way to visit anyone living. She steps through the doors and gives the nurse at the front desk a nod, receives one in return. She's known, if not expected. She needs no one's say-so as she makes her way to the staircase leading down to the morgue. On the descent, her heels ring unnaturally loud off the tile walls. She grits her teeth and ignores it. Whatever bad mojo coated that room like ashy black film, it feels as though it's followed her here. Swell. All she needs and then some. And yet her feet are carrying her down. Down, farther than they should. And all at once the floor is softening, and she's not only sinking, but being tugged by something powerful and unseen. The walls are shifting, breaking up and coalescing into new forms. Mud film, grease on a window pane, smears of drying blood spatter on the windshield of a rattling truck, bearing along the muffled groans of the dying. Through the mud, and the grease, and the blood, eye sockets empty, except for decaying strings of tissue. A living skull. Boy strung on the wire, all feeble twitches. He raised his head as she approached him. He was alive. He couldn't see her. He whispered that he couldn't see her. The crows had taken his eyes. Now he stares at her through the muddy curtain of what she once foolishly considered reality. Stares at her with no eyes and an infinite capacity for hideous perception. No. Everything down here is already dead. That should be a comfort. She falters and grips the railing, clenches her teeth, squeezes her eyes closed as if battling vertigo. But a world spinning like the thick of a hangover would be infinitely preferable to this sort of unbalance. She's not going to fall. Even if she did fall, she's nearly at the bottom of the staircase. But that doesn't matter because she's not going to. She's not. Close your eyes. Count to 10. She does, times the numbers with her breaths, feels her pulse begin to slow. There's death here, yes. Death defines this place. There's decay. She smells it beneath the tang of the formaldehyde. But it's quiet. It's controlled, planned, shaped. There's an intelligent mind doing the planning, the controlling. That mind belongs to a friend. When she trudges through the swinging stainless steel double doors and sees Ellen Jacobs bending over the table, it falls further away. Or she feels herself rising higher and out of it, the sucking mud drying up and releasing her feet. The walls merely plain walls again. Clean tile, washed, shiny. She almost smiles. It's easier now to focus more on the fact of being here, leave everything else behind. How she came to be here. Why? She wasn't really on her way here just to pay a call on a stiff. Or at least that's the reason, but that's not all she's getting. Ellen raises her head and flashes a quick smile, peels off a glove, and pushes a strand of salt and pepper hair slipped free of its pin behind her ear. Handsome middle age. Even now, this far removed from what drew her to this woman, and this close to the darkness that pulled her down for a few terrible minutes, Knox doesn't fail to notice how handsome Ellen is. Desire, mingled with regret, plucks at her already ragged edges. The woman nods at the table.
Morgan, good to see you. Here to look in on our bony friend.
Knox approaches, removing her fedora.
You knew I was coming.
Ellen steps aside and waves an inviting hand.
How could I not? With something this unorthodox. Care to have a look at him?
Got a pretty good look where we found him. But she peers down at the bones as she speaks, noting again how goddamn clean they are. As clean as the rest of the room wasn't, and a smooth eggshell pale in the harsh overhead lights. Please tell me you got some kind of clue what happened to him. Ellen sighs.
Honestly, it's one of the weirdest damn things I've ever seen.
She touches the polished ribcage with a gloved forefinger.
There are indications of injury, but they're all old. And anyway, they'd be completely non-lethal. There's not a single sign of trauma anywhere else. Nothing I can see that points to how he died.
Knox's mouth quirks in amusement.
I'd think having no flesh might have been a problem for him. Well, there's that.
Ellen chuckles and points to the joints of the knees, pelvis, arms.
But that's the thing. There's no flesh. There's no tissue at all. No shreds of muscle, no tendons, no ligaments. There's nothing holding the bones together. I had to reassemble him myself. You say it looked like he burned to death?
That's what the room looked like. This kind of greasy black ash all over everything. Ruined most of his fancy knickknacks. But none of them were actually damaged, except for that. It looked like a stain. Ellen taps a tibia thoughtfully.
Well, there's no sign of fire on the bones. I can say that much. Honestly, if I didn't know better, I'd say someone planted an anatomist's skeleton there as some kind of joke.
She shoots Knox a look, something clearly having occurred to her.
I don't suppose there's any chance that's what it is.
Knox shakes her head. If only. Some kind of stupid college kid prank would be infuriating, but far preferable to whatever she's just gotten herself mixed up in. You didn't see the room. And I don't think it was a firebug or anything like that. Whatever did it,
it wasn't normal.
Ellen finishes quietly and studies Knox with that disconcertingly intense focus. It's not cold, not exactly clinical, and certainly not judgmental. But Knox can never entirely shake the feeling that Ellen is trying to examine her from the inside out. Pick out each organ and label it. Note each abnormality. Once, part of her almost liked it, yearned for it, for the prospect of being seen that way. The rest of her recoiled. And it recoils now, although she doesn't budge. She thinks again about the controlled environment Ellen has created. How it exerts itself over the death that permeates everything here. And all at once, the darkness creeps back toward the edges, a scent of fresher blood, the faint sting of the formaldehyde twisting into the burning of the gas. The skull in front of her. Eyeless sockets, staring.
Morgan?
Hand on her arm, Knox blinks down at it, the softly weathered fingers curved over her sleeve. Once she wanted those hands on her. Once, those hands made the mud dry up and sink away, quieted the screaming, and cut the heads off the writhing snakes of barbed wire. God, she still doesn't mind that hand on her. She feels herself leaning toward it without moving. Not so much attraction as the most basic need to feel solid through someone else's solidity. She clears her throat and swings her gaze back up to Ellen's face.
Yeah?
Ellen doesn't withdraw her hand.
Have you been?
You just saw me a week ago.
Was more than a week. You're not answering the question.
Ellen's lips quirk, and there's sadness in the almost smile.
You've got this way of doing that, you know. You ask questions, but you're not so good at answering them. How have you been doing?
Knox finally pulls her arm away. Not fast, not hard. and with a reluctant pang deep in her gut. It shouldn't be like that. It shouldn't always be harder to stay. In any case, it wasn't an invitation for anything more. Ellen is a woman she cares about, a woman who has never made any bones about caring about her, touching her. I'm swell, Ellen. Really.
See? There's that word. You never use that word when it's actually true.
Ellen withdraws, turns partially away. She looks as if she'd prefer to be busy with something, but not because she wants Knox to leave. It's her hands. Now she doesn't know what to do with her hands.
What word should I use?
See, Knox can practically hear Ellen saying, "This is why it didn't work. This is why there's no way it ever could have worked. It's not your fault, but it's still true."
Never mind.
Pause.
We should meet up somewhere that isn't about dead people sometime. Dinner?
She reaches into the box of gloves, starts to slide one onto her bare hand.
We can go to that place you always liked, the Puerto Rican one on Mulberry and Hester.
I don't think so. Knox's voice is very quiet. Not there. Maybe someplace else. Sometime. Ellen looks back at her, expression difficult to read, but there's no surprise there. Maybe resignation. Ellen isn't going to question it because she understands. Sometimes you just can't go back. Some places are closed off once you leave them. Or something is waiting there for you.
Sometime,
Ellen echoes. Knox nods. Her hand moves half-consciously to her pocket as she does. The key. It's a relief to think of it. Don't dwell on what you can't control, Kresnik always said. Don't wool-gather. It's a blind alley to disappear down. Glue your eyes to what's right in front of you. Point them at what's next. Work the case. The rest of it will take care of itself. And if it doesn't, knock back a drink or two and you might feel like it has. Part of that advice she's decided to toss in the bin, but the rest of it has always struck her as solid. I should take off. I have something to look into. Ellen isn't happy, that much is clear. But she nods, and a kind of briskness flows back into her. She snaps the latex of her glove against her wrist, like she's trying to make some sort of point.
Suit yourself. I'll give you a ring if I find anything else.
Suit yourself. Right. Except not one thing about this suits her. Not one bit. The hum of Penn Station bounces off the massive marble pillars and vaulted ceiling, pours back down and washes over her like a tide. Bellevue always makes her uneasy. Penn Station does the precise opposite, and Knox couldn't begin to explain why. It might be the sheer immensity of the place, but it can't be that simple. With Abe at her heels, she walks through the doors and into it, into the realm of that hum. And it's as if there's nothing except for the station itself. She pauses and looks up at the ceiling far above her, the huge, barred half-moons of the windows, and the city night streaming through like daylight. Glimpses of what might be, but probably are not, stars. Motes in her eyes, filling the emptiness. And the place isn't empty. It never is. Always packed, always humming. But it's so easy to feel like she's walked into some ancient king's outrageously extravagant tomb, a building designed to make her feel small and humble. Maybe it does, but it's not bad, and it's not a tomb. The ancient king lost his hold on it long ago. Life rushed back in and overgrew it, and now it's full of people, the clatter-squeak of heels and luggage carts. Voices raised like rocks in a stream. Spherical glow of the lamps on their posts. The scuffed gleam of so much marble and glass. Dull sternness of iron. The metallic underworld growl of the trains. Something feels odd about the fact that she's been led here. As if invisible cords have wound around her and are pulling her along, according to some hidden but perfectly coherent design. And it's like she almost understands. She'd recognized the shape the moment Leclerc placed it in her hand. She's encountered the lockers at Penn Station once or twice before, and somehow wasn't surprised by it. "Wait here," she murmurs to Abe. She doesn't wait for assent, but glances back when she's a few feet away. He's leaned back against the wall by the doors, arms crossed, looking vaguely annoyed by the fact that he's not accompanying her. But she wants to do this alone, and in her opinion, she doesn't owe him an explanation. Her hand is in her coat pocket, the cool metal of the locker key warming in her palm. Before, she felt a species of tired apprehension when she thought of it. Now, her pulse is rising with excitement, as sharp and thin as a switchblade. Her senses are up, the dame with the clutch and the trembling hands, the fear like a smell on her. There, everything about what she said telegraphed, because she didn't have anywhere else to go. "You have to get to it before they do." Leclerc knew more than she was saying. That much was plain. But it's what she knows that's the question at hand. And as Knox weaves through the seethe of people heading to and from their trains, she's freshly irritated that she didn't get a chance to make more of an effort at drawing the woman out. Because if they're after whatever this key unlocks, and a man's clean bones are lying in the morgue, she's up against something. Directly. And she doubts that it's inclined to be her pal. So get moving. Knox picks up the pace, darts nimbly through the opening and closing spaces between bulky coats and luggage, ignoring mutters for her to watch it. She rounds a corner into another, smaller chamber, and heads toward the rows of lockers, withdraws the key, and glances around. A slouching lump of a man, a few feet away, fumbling with his own key. A pinch-faced woman, surrounded by a gaggle of chattering kids. A broad in a fur coat, who looks like she made up her face with a trowel. A geezer, sweeping up trash. A young couple murmuring quietly together near the opposite wall. Few other folks. No one who rings any alarms. You can never be sure you're in the clear, but sometimes you have to be sure enough. She turns back to the locker, inserts the key. After a few seconds of fiddling and a bit of strain, it clanks open. She reaches in and withdraws what she's been urged to get to before anyone else can. It's a dark brown leather case. Plain, a little worn. Nothing whatsoever special about it at first glance. Not very heavy. She turns it over in her hands, examines it closer. It's not locked. Wait, she knows. Wait until you get somewhere with a little privacy. Somewhere with a door that locks and a wall to get your back against. But curiosity jabs at her, sudden and irresistible, and she sets a thumb against one of the latches. Something slams into her from behind. She turns her head just in time to keep from breaking her nose against the lockers, takes the brunt of it with her cheek. Her teeth snap closed on her tongue and she winces, tastes copper. By some miracle, she's still got the case. Whatever hit her is pinning her with what feels like an arm braced against her mid-back, and a hand is groping at her side and trying to get around her. The case. She throws her weight violently backward, jabbing blindly with her elbow as she does. And in that second, she sees two things with bizarre focus. The first is the lumpy man gaping at her with a slack mouth and pale, bewildered eyes. A paper-wrapped parcel forgotten in his hands. The other is the dame. Half of the young couple standing too close, her hat askew, and her mug twisted into a nasty sneer. Her eyes are completely oil black. Crazily, Knox thinks of the greasy ash that covered everything but Sivarek's bones. The dame thrusts hands hooked into claws toward the case. Knox shoves herself backward with one more vicious elbow jab. This time she seems to connect. The man lets out a pained grunt and staggers. Enough for her to slip free, so she does. The woman hisses angrily and grabs for Knox's arm. All she catches is a fold of coat, which Knox wrenches free. There's a nice kind of clarity about situations like this. What you do in them, you don't have to think. You scram. She breaks back into the main hall, and now the hum is louder, crowding dizzily in on her instead of flowing. The glossy floor is darkening, softening. Mud is sucking at her feet. The lampposts are withering into dead trees, stripped of bark and leaves. Thin shadows like wire are twisting up the grand pillars. The rumble of the trains is the rumble of something else entirely. She can't close her eyes, and she can't count to 10. She clenches her jaw and pushes through, knocks shoulders left and right, and stumbles, nearly drops. Shit, so much for nimble. But Penn Station is Penn Station again. Mostly. The voices around her sound oddly far away, not much to do with her.
Hey, watch
Look
it!
where you going, lady?
What's the idea, you screwy broad?
Her focus is narrowing to the world right in front of her. Everything that doesn't matter rising opaquely on either side, like the walls of a trench. She dodges around a lamppost and into a patch where the people aren't clustered so thick, the case clutched against her side. Lost them? She glances over her shoulder. Can't see them in the throng, but that doesn't mean anything. Attention forward again. Pull her gun? No, not with this many people, and such a high chance of a shot going wide. Anyhow, she doesn't have time. The doors. Get to the goddamn doors. Something so tall and dark appears in front of her that for a second she thinks one of the pillars has sprouted out of the floor, like one of those dead trees. Then she hits it and goes sprawling, and in another one of those frozen instants, she looks up and sees a grinning hulk of a man, his fists raised, his black eyes narrowed. She hits the marble, catches herself on her hands, pushes aside the burst of pain at the impact. The case flies out of her hand and slides across the floor. She gasps, finds her knees, and scrambles after it. Gets her fingers around the handle, just as the mountain man grabs. Knox flips herself onto her side and kicks as she does. The heel of her shoe meets thick flesh, and the man snarls and reels. Back on her feet and running again. No one is going to help. She knows that as sure as she knows anything. Most folks see a scene like this, they go blank and stupid, and simply gawk like people at a picture show. Most folks have never had their lives depend on their reflexes. She usually doesn't hold it against them. But boy, right about now, it would be nice to have a hand. And unless he's followed her, Abe is still somewhere up ahead, near the exit, not yet visible through the crowd. She pauses, pulls the case close against her middle, and fumbles with it, and almost immediately regrets doing so. Grunts so close behind, and she can practically feel hot breath on the back of her neck. She swings wide, and through another clot of onlookers, glimpses sets of wide bovine eyes. Cries of anger and consternation seconds after she's through. She smiles tightly. Straight in front of her are the doors, and Abe, and once she makes it to him and makes it to his cab outside, she's home free. But right now, she has to deal with something else, because they've flanked her. The couple from before, one on either side of her, and closing in, those awful black eyes. And past them, rushing at the very doors she's pelting toward, are two more of them. Men sporting entirely too much muscle. Abe is pushing away from the wall. Confusion rapidly hardening into grim determination as he takes rapid stock of her situation. He clenches his fists and throws himself at one of the two newcomers, jams his shoulder into the man's chest and shoves him backward. But the other one is ignoring Abe and his friend entirely, moving to intercept her with an ugly grin twisting his face. She's not going to make it, not unless she does something drastic. She drops the case. The one that stormed past Abe lunges toward it for a precious few seconds, forgetting about her. She sprints past them all and hits the doors at full speed, bursts out into the crisp night and onto the sidewalk. She doesn't look back. She doesn't need to. Abe won't hang around once she's past. And in fact, she's barely out the doors when she hears the meaty thud of a fist hitting flesh, and a corresponding grunt, then heavy pelting feet behind. She reaches the hack parked at the curb with Abe skidding to a stop beside her, yanks the door open and throws herself onto the back seat. Abe, drive. He's already in the driver's seat, kicking the engine to growling life. In a flash, he meets her eyes in the mirror, but he doesn't protest any of this, doesn't demand that she provide even the barest explanation. The engine roars to life and he floors it, weaves through traffic as nimbly as she first did through the crowd. Knox turns, cranes her neck to see out the back window. She just manages to catch the group of them standing on the curb where she'd been half a moment before, staring blackly after her. One of them is holding the opened, empty case. She exhales. All of her goes loose at once, and she slumps against the seat, finally able to pull in a real breath. Get to it before they do. Yeah, she would have appreciated knowing about them. Abe meets her eyes again. His own are stormy. Beneath the storm is worry.
You want to tell me what the hell that was about?
Knox sighs. Would you believe me if I told you I'm not sure?
What do you think?
I'm not. A couple of goons and some dame came after me, tried to drop me, tried to get what I went there for. Abe raises an eyebrow.
Yeah, I got that much. You got any clue why?
Not yet. Knox looks down at the cloth-wrapped bundle in her lap. Her bitten tongue is beginning to swell, and her cheek feels bruised. Probably not the only thing that is. Her palms are still stinging. This is all starting out so well. But you better believe I'm going to find out. Knox's office isn't what most people would probably call homey, but just now it feels like all the home she's interested in. It used to be Kresnik's back in the day, when Knox Investigations was the R.M. Kresnik Detective Agency. Dim and made of sharp angles, hard even among the clutter of files and secondhand furniture, even sharper as a narrow triangle than a regular rectangle would be. For reasons she could never explain to anyone, Knox has liked it since she set foot through the door what feels like several very strange lifetimes ago. Perhaps it has something to do with the windows, the places where the space seems to open out into the vastness of height, above most of the buildings that surround Flatiron, looking out toward the looming spike of the Empire State Building. Dark air and speckled lights. The city looks so much simpler from 14 stories up. Sometimes, when she's alone in here, Knox turns out the lamps and stands before that view, hand on the window frame, feeling that empty space, feeling herself inside it. The distance of the ground is comforting. Nothing can reach up and grab her. Nothing can pull her down. She's too high. The times when the Empire State Building abruptly twists into a dead tree bound with twitching black snakes of bloody wire are uncommon enough that she can manage them. And when it comes to the office itself, the darkness almost never intrudes. Adding to the present vaguely comforting atmosphere is Danny, bent over her and applying first aid to her bangs and scrapes, and expressing annoyance with them, and, amiably, with her for bringing them home. "When you said you'd stop by, I didn't mean like this," Danny mutters. "It's not exactly a thing I planned." Knox shoots back, and hisses as Danny dabs her cheek a bit more firmly than he needs to. The iodine that soaks the cloth already stings, and she's hardly a baby about things like this, not inclined to squall. But it's the perfect lid screwed on to a perfect day. Danny considers his handiwork and tears off a small strip of gauze. "You didn't plan not to. I wish you'd start doing that. If Ellen got a look at you, she'd pitch a fit." Good thing she ain't here then. Danny sighs. "I don't think you'll have a black eye. Speaking of Ellen, did she have anything to tell you?" Knox leans back in her creaking desk chair, pulls the pack of Luckies out of her coat, lights one with a flick of her Zippo, and exhales. "Yes, but I didn't want to hear it. Nothing I can do anything with yet. She can't tell what killed Siverek." The corner of Danny's mouth quirks. "He lost all his skin. I figure that might have something to do with it." "That's what I said. Still doesn't get me any closer to how. Or why." Abe lifts his grizzled head from his open issue of the Herald Tribune and scowls even more fiercely than before, which is a significant amount. He's been settled on the ratty sofa by the door since not long after they walked in, and an outside observer might conclude that the paper indicates a lack of interest in their conversation. But Knox knows better. He's listening to every word. Abe is capable of focusing sharply on more than one thing at once. Likely it's why he navigates the traffic and streets of the city with a competence bordering on ease.
"Comes to why? You got any intention of ever leveling with me about what was up at Penn Station?"
Knox takes a long drag. The nicotine is pleasantly smoothing out her nerves.
I told you, I got jumped. Dunno whether they were watching the lockbox or me or both, but I barely made it out of there with my skin. Danny perches on the edge of the desk and plucks up Knox's Zippo to light his own smoke. Frowns. They were after the box? Knox smiles grimly. The case inside the box, yeah. Not a lot of doubt about that. But you dropped it. Abe grunts. Had to. Pretty sure I wouldn't have made it out otherwise. This whole thing is fishy as hell. More than usual, even. Abe shakes out the Herald Tribune and briefly holds it up so she can see, points to a block of text about halfway down the page. It's even getting into the papers. Listen to this. Even before he clears his throat and starts to read, Knox catches sight of the little headline above the text of the article, and something tightens above her diaphragm. Philanthropist's mysterious death baffles police. Well, she thinks, it ain't exactly an obituary. Few details are clear regarding the sudden death of Mr. Volkan Siverek, whose body was discovered yesterday in his luxurious Upper East Side home. Police have refused to comment, but sources have indicated that his death is highly suspicious and may be a case of murder, although they admit that some form of suicide is also possible. The precise manner of Mr. Siverek's death has not been revealed, and this reporter has been unable to ascertain the reason for the silence. It is difficult to draw any conclusions at this time, but the unwillingness of the police to be forthcoming about the case raises questions in and of itself. Whether they are troubled by their inability to explain the cause of death, or merely concealing what they know for some other reasons, is a matter for dispute. Perhaps, somewhat befitting his mysterious end, Mr. Siverek himself was a mysterious figure. A wealthy philanthropist and founder of the Odessa Club, a private organization dedicated to literary pursuits. Little is known about him prior to his emigration to America from Turkey, shortly after the end of the Great War. Apparently a prominent but highly reclusive figure in, let me guess. Knox cuts in. It's Pac. Abe gives her a wry smile. You know it. When it comes to fishy, fella's got a nose for it like a hungry tomcat. Abe isn't wrong. She won, Pac. Journalist and would-be muckraker, which he's never explicitly said. But Knox has been aware of the focus of his work for a long time now, and she's always been good at picking up on patterns. He digs up the corrupt schemes of the powerful, the hidden networks and mechanisms that power New York City's biggest wheels. Or doing so is a good day for him. The byline will say John Packard, his legal name predictably not considered as respectable by his editors. But it's not as though most informed people don't know who he truly is. Not unlike Knox herself, who rarely uses her full name of Morgan Knox Alvarez in favor of the white-passing part gifted by her Scottish father. And he can indeed smell fishy a mile away. If he's onto this, he's not going to let up until he gets down to what he's at least willing to accept as the truth. Probably not a bad thing, Danny says. If he's willing to share whatever he finds, could be some advantage in it. But Abe looks sour. Knox doesn't ask him to get into why. Abe's irritation at Pac's general mode of operation is well known to her. Ambition like Pac's doesn't admit much in the way of trust, and while he's been useful in the past, she doesn't trust him much either. His work comes first. Loyalty to anything else is decidedly secondary at best. You gonna get in touch with him? Knox shrugs. Maybe. Maybe he'll get in touch with me first. He has to know I got hauled in for questioning. In any case, I've got more immediate things to deal with. She gestures at the cloth bundle. Some people were willing to go to some pretty significant lengths to make sure I didn't get my hands on that case. Abe huffs. You can say that again. Those goons at the station looked ready to yank your damn arm off to get it away from you. If you hadn't dropped it... Yeah, well... Knox gives him a thin smile. Wasn't just my running, it was your driving. Anyway, the important thing is I got what was in it. Give it here. Let's see what was worth trying to kill me for. The cloth, worn, although not threadbare, devoid of print or pattern, is wrapped tight but not knotted, and it takes her only a few seconds to reveal what it's been holding.
Abe steps forward, his eyes alight with interest beneath his thick brows. Danny shifts to the side to give him a better view. Knox exhales. Nothing here in the way of immediately solving any mysteries, and if anything, she'd already be willing to bet this stuff will only make for new ones. A phonograph cylinder and a wad of bills secured with a paper band. Danny picks up the latter and thumbs through it, his eyes widening. There must be... something like $500 here. Abe whistles.
Got any idea what you're supposed to do with it? Hold on to it for some kind of safekeeping, or is that for your expenses?
Knox picks up the cylinder, turning it over as if she can glean some kind of sense from it through sight alone. No idea. Broad who gave me the key never said. I didn't have any clue what it unlocked until just now. Danny sets down the cash and nods at the cylinder. Only one way to find out about that, then. Knox has an ancient Edison in the corner of the office, its wood scratched and its trumpet tarnished to an ugly gold brown. She rarely uses it. When it comes to music, the radio is good enough to the extent that she cares, but she's betting it still works, and she hauls it over to the desk, inserts the cylinder, turns the crank. The first thing she notices, when Siverek's cool and slightly accented voice crackles out of the machine, is that it's clearer than she'd have expected. Perhaps a clearer and crisper sound than she's ever heard from a phonograph. The second thing doesn't rise to the surface immediately. All her conscious attention settles on what Siverek is saying.
Hello, Miss Knox. I'm recording this at approximately 8:30 in the evening on Wednesday, the 18th. I don't expect that I have much time left now, so I'll come straight to the point. I expect that very soon I will be murdered.
There is no pause. Siverek said he wouldn't waste time, and he doesn't. But nevertheless, there seems to be one. A patch of frozen silence smacking down in the middle of the three of them. Knox exchanges glances with Abe, with Danny. He knew. Son of a bitch knew. And he doesn't sound especially bothered by it. That was a few hours before he was found dead. Knox murmurs and shuts up as Siverek continues.
What I'm vexingly uncertain of, Miss Knox, is precisely who will introduce me to whatever lies beyond. I've come to believe you were correct about what you said in my office. All of this is personal. Someone I know must be behind it, and I believe it is one of 3 close associates of mine. Mr. Stephen Train, Mr. Laszlo Kovacs, or Dr. Werner Klein. I intend to order my secretary, Miss Leclerc, to contact you in order to deliver this offer of employment. If you are listening to this, she has succeeded, and you have safely recovered what I have left for you.
Abe snorts. Safely.
My motivation for doing this is simple. I wish you to discover who has killed me and why. As I said, I am confident that my murderer is one of the 3 men I've mentioned. You should therefore direct your inquiries toward them. But I must offer you a word of caution, Miss Knox.
His voice drops, and Knox notices the second thing. It doesn't merely appear. It rises, as if it was there the entire time, and is only little by little crawling into her range of hearing. It would be easy to mistake it for a jagged current in the phonograph's regular crackle hiss, but Knox doesn't mistake it for anything other than what it is. Whispers. Soft, fluttering against her eardrums like moth wings. Unintelligible, but there is sense in them that she can almost pick out. She doesn't want to do anything of the kind. She wants so damn much not to. Something cold and spidery is beginning to crawl up her spine. She watches, vaguely entranced, as ash tumbles from the end of her cigarette and drifts down to rest on the back of her hand. Whatever it is, she shouldn't be hearing it.
I know you are a detective who specializes in the unusual. Unusual events contain unusual hazards. I am sure you saw that my manner of death was not of the usual kind. There are shadows in the corners of this mystery, and they are watching you. And they may not mean you well.
Whispers. Too many whispers. Thick as smoke behind that smooth, cultured voice. Black smoke curling up the walls. Is she hearing what killed him?
I will be plain. You must be careful of where you go, what you do, who you trust. I hope harm will not come to you, but I cannot promise that it won't. And I am very afraid that, in ways you may not realize, it already has. I've given you everything I can. The money you've recovered with this cylinder is yours. And easily twice that will be yours if you find who killed me and why. If you...
The whispers surge to a crescendo, drowning him out in their tide. Knox snaps her head up, the first syllable of, "Do either of you hear that?" on her tongue. And it dries up and blows away like ash as Danny's eyes roll up to the whites. His muscles are rigid, shaking, locked. He makes no attempt to catch himself as he tips toward the floor. Knox lets her cigarette fall in time to see the same trembling working at Abe's edges. Off! Abe, turn it the fuck up! But in spite of what's overtaking him, he's ahead of her, snatching up the Edison and hurling it at the floor. The whispers die in a metallic crash. Abe and Knox lunge in unison, catch Danny together just before he hits. He's jerking under their hands as they lower him the rest of the way, his jaw tight and his teeth gritted. His eyes. Knox wrenches away from it, even as it slams into her. Mud and blood indistinguishable from each other, the sky a falling gray mass. The boy crumpled in her arms as she pulls him up, dead past rigor. These are his pale, gaping eyes. They look through her. She isn't there. Snakes of rusty wire burst through the ground and coil around him, dragging him down. She clasps him. She won't let them. He's dead, but she won't let them take him. And then he is gone. All at once, not dragged away from her, but simply vanished, leaving heavy emptiness in her arms. In his place, in the place of everything, is somewhere entirely other. Street of shifting, dark shadows, like the night shredded by car headlights. Sallow street lamps. Everywhere, trash. Rows of worn, sad tenements. No one around her as far as she can see, but shapes like people drifting through her. Ghosts. Or she's a ghost. She knows where it is. In a flash, it hits her. She knows where, and she knows why. Morgan! Hand gripping her shoulder. Rough but not unkind. Familiar. Shaking her. Abe's slaty eyes. Morgan, you can let him go. He's out of it. Whatever it was, he's out. She blinks, shakes herself, forces her arms to loosen. Stares down at Danny, whose dark eyes are staring back at hers through a kind of haze. He hauls in a shuddering breath and reaches weakly for her. Don't feed it. Don't. What? Danny, don't what? All at once, the haze clears. Danny frowns at her and flicks his confused gaze from her to Abe. Don't... What are you talking about? He presses his palm to his temple, bats Knox and Abe away, and starts to push himself up with the other. What the hell happened? Abe, feels like I took your hack right in the damn face. Knox rocks back on her knees. The mud is gone. The barbed wire is gone. It's just the threadbare rug, the pitted floorboards, the same old ugly wallpaper. The war is over, she thinks, for perhaps the 1000th time. It's always Ray's voice saying it, because it was always him who said it. Then her own. Bullshit. But it wasn't just the war. She blinks, and behind her closed lids, she sees it again. The street. the shadows, the tenements, the knowing, where it is, and why. A deeper why than the simple question of how the hell she saw it at all. She doesn't need to understand precisely how. She'll be grateful for the moment that she saw something that doesn't make her want to curl up in a ball and grip the sides of her head and scream her throat raw. She studies Danny, close as she can without discomfiting him even more. "Did you hear anything?" Danny tips his head forward, eyes squeezed briefly shut. "Bunch of spooky talk about shadows and danger. You mean aside from that?" Knox glances at Abe. Obvious from the look on his face that he didn't hear it either. She sighs. Something in the background, like other voices, and no, I couldn't catch what they were saying. She waves a hand. "Leave it for now. You think you can get on your feet?" Danny nods, grumbles that he's fine when Knox and Abe together pull him up. He wobbles slightly, has to lean on the desk a bit, but he stays up. His eyes widen when he sees the phonograph lying broken on the floor a few feet away.
"Cripes, Abe. What'd he do? Insult your old lady?"
"It did something," Abe says, and eyes the thing, as if he half expects it to hop back on the desk and start up again. "I didn't hear anything, but I felt it. Another couple seconds and I'd have probably been down there with you." "Did something," Danny repeats, and looks at Knox. His face says it all. So this one is really no joke. Knox nods grimly. If only it was. Danny's expression turns thoughtful. He knew he was going to die, and rather than try to stop it, he dropped you a line. Knox pushes her chair toward Danny. Without argument, he sinks into it. We don't know he didn't try to. Didn't sound as if he was all that distressed by it, though, did he? I swear he sounded more worried about you. Danny's not wrong. Yet another thing about this to dislike. Knox bends, plucks the smoldering butt of her smoke off the rug, and lights another one, starts to pace. So, there's the names he mentioned, the ones he fingered as suspects. For a murder that hadn't happened yet. But something about the names themselves is tugging at her. One in particular. Klein. Shit. Danny pauses in the act of reaching into her desk drawer for her bottle of gin. What about him? She exhales. I know him. Or I never met him, but I know the name. He's a doctor. Ray's been going to him. More than that, she's come to associate the name with conversations she'd do just about anything not to have. Abe is scowling again. No longer at the broken phonograph, but at her. So, this business is already closer to you than you thought. Swell. Danny takes a swig of gin, coughs, and wipes his lips. If you're going to insist on following this up, then sounds like someone might want to talk to Ray. He's not trying to dissuade her, at least not head-on. Knox takes the bottle from him and knocks back a swallow. She knows this dance. She's taken a turn around this floor 100 times by now. Danny will worry about her, but he'll do whatever needs doing. Abe will grumble here and there, but he'll do the same. And her? She'll work the case. And it's not just about the money. It never is. Although that wad of cash is a nice thing to hold, she won't deny it. Danny, think you can take care of that part? Have a chat with Ray, see what he's got to say? Perhaps she should talk to Ray herself. But something else suddenly feels more pressing, because it hits her that there's one other name Siverek didn't mention. Associates of Siverek were already knocked off before Siverek was, and, in that case, there was no doubt about who was doing it. Allegedly, already resolved. But there's still a hell of a lot she doesn't know. And there's a thing he said at the end, which didn't sit right with her then, and sure as hell doesn't now. Danny nods, but curiosity flashes in his eyes. And what'll you be doing? She stubs out her smoke. Got something else I need to look into. Abe arches a brow. Which is? Craddock. Danny coughs a faintly incredulous laugh. Hold on a minute, isn't he, dead? That he is. But if he hadn't taken a stroll off a bridge, he'd be the prime suspect. She gets to her feet. What she saw, Better not to get into that with them. At least not yet. 10 to 1, at some point she won't be able to avoid it anymore. Craddock being dead doesn't solve anything. Just means I never got to ask a whole mess of questions. And I still want them answered.
You're listening to The Shadow Files of Morgan Knox, narrated by Pilar Uribe. Produced by Realm, your portal to another world. Realm, listen away. The Shadow Files of Morgan Knox is written by Arsenault Rivera, Brooke Bolander, Gabino Iglesias, and Sunny Moraine. Produced by Marco Palmieri and executive produced by Molly Barton. Audio production, sound design, editing, and theme music by Amanda Rose Smith.